Good morning. I'd like to call this special Darien Board of Education Facilities meeting to order. Today is Thursday, February 2nd, Groundhog Day. The groundhog did see a shadow, so 6 more weeks of winter. Yippee. We have a pretty big agenda. We actually have some audience, some people in the audience, which is exciting. And our first item on the agenda is an update on the library renovation designs for Darien High School, Middlesex Middle School, and Tokenique. Dr. Adler.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. Thank you for those of you who are here in person and those who are online. I'm delighted this morning to welcome our friends from Silver Petrocelli, who have rendered drawings, schematic drawings, preliminary drawings for the libraries. So they're going to take us the opportunity to walk through those drawings, and the board will have an opportunity to reflect. We have had at our last meeting, we went through just general concepts of what it might look like, and this is a wee bit more in detail. These are reflective of discussions with our various staff across the district as well. So with that, I'll let our guests come to the table and they can introduce themselves.
Perfect. Well, good morning. My name is Amanda Cleveland. I am principal of Silver Petrocelli and Associates, the Interiors Department. And with me, I have Jennifer Lipset, the interior designer who did all of the programming and meetings with the staff. So I'm going to quickly kind of run through the presentation. I do talk fast because I'm used to being under a timeline. So if you need me to slow down, just let me know. But in advance, we did get a few questions from Kevin just to address, mostly making sure that we are meeting the instructional needs of all 3 schools. The equity and the parity between the 3 elementary schools that are currently under design or construction, what the benefits would be of doing all 3 libraries together, and then just the differences in the design concepts for age-related practices. So most of that is addressed in the presentation. So I'm just going to kind of quickly run through that. Go ahead and go to the first one. So the first one we're going to take a look at is Darien High School. So as you can see, what we've done is we've given you the enrollment count, sort of what the program should include, and then the design objectives that we were trying to meet. So a lot of it has to do with going from your standard library to what is now considered either a media center or a learning commons. So we're breaking that traditional, very quiet zone, going for research, and we're getting more collaborative and providing different zones of education, whether it's independent study, if it's using manipulatives, going into presentation modes, those sort of things. So if you take a quick look at the floor plan, we did color code them to try and make it a little bit easier to understand. But what you'll see is we have green zones, which are your reading and large group presentations. Purple zones, which are sort of your lounge and touchdown spaces. We've got your podcast rooms, your peaches and pinks being the more active zones where they're maker spaces or instructional study and cafe. A lot of what you're seeing in this renovation is off to the right where you have that large reading room. You're seeing reduction in book stacks, although we are keeping your counts higher. You're seeing mobile tables so that that room can be reconfigured. We are showing some tiered seating. If you want to have an informal lecture series, you're able to do that within that room. Adding doors with glazing. So a lot of it is about vision and being able to, from that central point, be able to see to all points of the library, but also being able to close it off for acoustics. And then you're seeing the centralized desk in the middle there, just past that as you're coming in through the vestibule. And then your learning zones off to the side. So we've got, it really does just focus on flexibility. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see how we're addressing that with the furniture. So we're providing low mobile circulation desks. It used to be you were built in sort of behind a barricade. Now we're putting them out in the center, and we're actually bringing stools up to them, getting the students to interact more with the directors. We're putting our bookshelves on casters so that if you need to have a truly large meeting, you are able to physically move those stacks out of the way without needing to get custodians in there to help you. And then just some fun seating for the kids, because let's face it, all these kids go to Starbucks or wherever, and they have the comfy couches and stuff. So we want to make our media centers where these kids want to go and learn and be comfortable on par with what they're seeing out in the field. And go to the next slide. Again, we're showing you chairs on casters with book racks underneath. You're able to sit facing forward or backwards, whatever makes the student more comfortable to learn and interact. That's what we're trying to provide. Next slide. Just more examples of how we're doing that with mobile whiteboards, different types of seating, Bottom right, you're seeing how we're creating these sort of instructional zones. So you can come down, the kids can put their Chromebooks or their tablets on that table. They attach to a puck. It's all of a sudden just drawn up to that TV. And then you've got that back row. We call that sort of the semi-committed people. They may want to sit there and hear the presentation, but they have to get up and do something else. They're not sitting right at the table, so they're not going to interrupt someone if they need to get up and move on, but you can come and touch down at any point. Next slide. Again, just trying to show you the different types of flexibility, our maker spaces and cafe lounges, how we're doing the different forms of furniture. Next slide. Makerspace furniture is becoming very common. It was not very common a few years ago, but we're starting to see mobile storage. That way, your spaces, if you need to move everything out and make it a different function, you're able to do that very easily. Slide. Podcast rooms. So we're seeing a lot of schools doing morning news, or kids who want to get into YouTube or podcasting. They're actually giving instructional classes on that now. So making sure that we've got proper acoustics, green screens, and all the audiovisual equipment that you might need in that space. Reading room furniture, again, just showing you that flexibility. An example of the tiered seating. Sorry, off to the top right, you're seeing an example of that built-in tiered seating, sort of collegiate style, and really getting the high schoolers ready to go on to that collegiate type facility. Go ahead.
Acoustics.
Acoustics.
In that room are pretty rough. So these are some perforated veneer wood panels that help absorb some of that sound.
Go ahead. And just architectural elements. So because vision is one of the requests, we did do a movable glass partition, acoustic partition in those meeting spaces. There are many alternatives that we could look at for that if we wanted to, but just wanted to give you the sense of what we were looking at. Next slide. Large group presentation room, we are looking at multiple TVs so that you can do either individualized sort of, you've got that one Zoom room off to the right and you've got your presentation to the left, or your image can capture all 4 screens for large presentations. So that's kind of it for the high school. Unless you want to go back and talk specifically about that, I'll kind of move through to the others.
I'm okay moving through and then we can ask questions after.
Okay. So what you're going to see at the next few, we're going to kind of go a little bit faster because it's addressing the same thing. So Middlesex Middle School, a little bit smaller scale. Again, you'll see the program includes all of the instructional, the lounge space, and the design objectives, again, about the flexibility, collaboration, and really having those different types of learning zones. So at the floor plan, you'll see much smaller scale. We are providing that more individual instruction space. You see that less in the elementary school. The elementary is more open and collaborative. Here we are trying to create that closed zone to be able to do learning. In the center in the blue, what you're seeing is the traditional stacks with the seating mixed in between, and then the more maker space in the upper corner. Here we're having some construction to give the workroom a little more space and then provide that private office needs for that. Again, if you go to the next slide, we'll kind of just quickly go through similar concepts in terms of multimedia screens, the flexible seating. You're seeing we're even showing portable whiteboards that hang off the end of the desks so that if you're going from computer learning to I need to write down a math problem, you have that right at your fingertips. And then the flexible sort of nesting mobile seating. We're showing some reading zones, whether that's for teacher instruction or the kids. If you prefer to sit on the floor, prefer to sit on a bench, we're just trying to give them a couple of different options of how they can go in and use that media center. Again, those fun swivel chairs, the little cocoons that some kids like to sit in. Lounge areas with mobile screens, whether they are acoustical, we could put a tack board material, we could put whiteboard material. It's sort of up to you how you want to produce those spaces. Makerspace again. So in the high school level, it's a lot more technical. It might be more robotics. Here, we're going to come down a notch. And so you'll have intricate Lego labs. You might have some small robotics that you're doing. Next slide. And then again, that green screen room. So here we were requested to just paint the entire room green so that any wall could be used for production. And then providing all of the audio visual. We did do some color changing glass for privacy. So it'll be clear on normal function. If you need to go into a lockdown function or you just need recording privacy, you do the switch glass and it goes opaque. Acoustics, again, is another big concern. So we show some architectural elements, whether it's carpeting the floor or putting clouds in the ceiling. And then our last school, the elementary school, again, program objectives of the makerspace, story time, instructional, and again, same design objectives, trying to get that collaboration and those different zones. So here you'll see a smaller footprint even than from the middle school. We've got the mobile desks. So those break apart. They come together for collaboration, but they break apart for individualized instruction. In the dark pink, you'll see the reading zone. So that's soft lounge seating that can come together, but it could also very easily be moved apart if you need a large gathering space. And then you've got that makerspace area. Here again, just showing you the configurations for mobile shelving that gives the flexibility to go from individual spaces to one large open room if you need to have a meeting. Next slide. Little bit smaller scale on the makerspace here. So now we're really talking about more manipulatives and less about electronics, although it's the possibility. So just trying to show you the different types of built-in storage in those tables. Again, they're on casters, so you're able to move them very easily. Examples of the mobile seating. So the triangular tables is sort of what's making up those group tables when you need it. Mobile bookcases with whiteboards on the back if you want to have a quick impromptu meeting. Story time, that's sort of the padded seating that we talked about. Right now, it's set up in a configuration where it's tiered, but those could break apart in any configuration, providing little what we call poofs or stools. Again, the kids could lie on their bellies if they wanted to. They could sit on them. They could sit on the floor and use them as a prop. Always adding in some different flexible seating. The tables that you see up in the left, those are actually whiteboard tables. So lay flat for working on, put up for presentation if you wanted to. And then again, just the architectural elements, the acoustics, the carpeting, creating zones, adding some fun colors, and just creating a lively, exciting space. So from a concept standpoint, each school is sort of on parity with each other. They all have the same learning objectives. It's just we've changed the scale of the furniture or provided different zones based on the age of the student that's in that school. And then in terms of the parity with the 3 elementary schools that are currently under construction, I do feel that we've met all of the learning objectives that was put forth for those schools have been introduced here as well. So whether that's within the materials being selected, furniture, or even the learning zones that we've identified, those are on par with the other 3 schools. So I'm going to pause if you have any questions before we get into budget.
Open up for questions. Anyone have questions? Jill?
Well, it looks wonderful. I think my questions really would be more for administration in terms of process, because
Sure.
I might have questions about that, but ultimately at this price point, it's probably going to the building committee.
First of all, Joan sitting here, the Director of Informational Technology, and I want to thank her because she's been instrumental from the elementary schools right through in coordinating all of these projects. If we recall, this has been in the pipeline for a long time, and it was going to be funded through gifts and different things and sort of piecemeal. So this is why it's been brought back in this form. And I want to thank you for doing an excellent job and presentation of it. I think if I could just talk in global sort of perspectives, I did include the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Information Technology put together a memorandum for today that includes all of the educational specifications, for the want of a better term, that we're trying to address here. I think about talking in big picture stuff. We're talking about middle school next as a separate agenda item. I think we obviously prioritize the high school, but it's the oldest one. It's the one that needs the most work done in terms of sequencing. And then go through. We've got a lot on our table. We've got all the HHR projects. I would think as we wind down the HHR projects are completed, we would then do them. This is me just talking to you, and suggestion from administration here of we would then do that one, right? The middle school, because if the board is going to go forward with a project at the middle school, right, it would make sense because you've got auditorium needs there, you got space, the classroom needs there, you got cafeteria needs there. So we would suggest at that point then to do a study on the middle school, which includes this. Tokenique for me would be last. I know we want equity and of resources and learning, but I think we have that. And honestly, the other schools have lived through like portables and like lots of conditions that you would say were not equitable. I would say the educational programming and the programming at Tokenique, by and large, we can provide the same sort of instruction, but I do want to upgrade it. But if you're asking me in sequence, it would be those three. I don't know if that's the question you're asking, but I'm just trying to answer that.
Well, a little bit, because I think, again, we might have specific questions, but at this point, we're not really talking about, the design is in line with what we're seeing in the other libraries. That was the hope here.
Mhm.
I think it's valuable to take probably some of this information and share with HHR, given that it's still in development and there's some best practices that might be interesting to share. But ultimately, I think I'm assuming what we really want to come out of this presentation with is an understanding of the concept, and then going from there to understand what next steps would be.
Correct.
Hey, Danny, can I ask a question?
Please, John.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Hey, Alan, if you look at kind of the curriculum memo and what you just lined up, very preliminary prioritization in terms of the projects, do they also line up from a curriculum standpoint?
Oh, yes,
i.e.,
yes.
which facility, like from a curriculum standpoint, is most desirable to start or most in need?
I would still say the high school.
Perfect.
By far.
Thanks.
Katie, any questions or? Okay. Just one question I had on this as well was, at one point we were talking about having an outdoor classroom at
Yes.
Middlesex. Is that outside of the scope of this, or is that something we're still contemplating or?
So that is still on the table for consideration, but there's not much. Well, I wouldn't want to do the actual outside classroom if we're going to do the actual renovation of this at the same time. I would like to see what I'll say Silver Petroselli at the moment they're standing here, they've done this. I was like, I'd like to see what would be the integration of that if we're going to go forward with that. But to do it now would I'm not so sure would make most sense until we get the full picture, which we can get.
Okay,
And that's not included in the scope of.
Correct.
I didn't think so, but I was just.
Correct. It was something that we were aware of, that we knew was a potential to be added, but it was not added as part of this review.
Okay, thank you.
So the question about that could be, do we want to go ahead with that? It's not a board funded project. It was going to be funded through the foundation. And they're willing to provide the funds for that as a gift to the district, and I would have to go through that process. If it was accepted, then I think we'd ask Silver Petroselli to add on a rendition to that.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, any other questions or?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So just very quickly, what we have put before you is just a summary of the very detailed estimate that we provided to you to see where all the wish list items that we heard for all three schools, where that falls financially. So right now, what you're seeing is Tokenique is about 863. You're seeing Middlesex at 995, and then you're seeing the high school at 1.9. So the question kind of came back to us is, what could we do to potentially get these projects ideally under $1 million? So on the next slide.
This is the.
I guess.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
And
So I thought it was the other budget.
The wrong. I don't know what I did there.
you can just go back. Go ahead. I think you can go back.
Oh, I got it.
Well, while you're figuring that out, so our original budget had each school over $1 million. So what we did is we sat back and we said, there's a number of items in here that are wish list items that would make an ideal school. But what items could be, okay, so here we go. So we were at 1.1 for the elementary, we were 1.2 for the middle, and 2.6 for the high school. So on the other slide, what we did is we sort of, without your input, said, well, what are the items that could come out of there that are not required for curriculum, but are nice things to have that we could pull out? So what we did for each one, and I won't read them, is we pulled out a few things like the smart glazing. It's a wonderful feature, but it's expensive at $200,000. We could achieve that in different ways with inexpensive window film versus doing the switch glass. So we tried to identify those for each school. And what you'll see is we got Tokenique and Middlesex under that $1 million budget that we were trying to hit, including FF&E. So the FF&E is still included. The high school, we are still at 1.9. So we've cut 600,000 out of that. But in order to get ourselves under $1 million for that school, I think we really need to start talking about scope. It's not going to be cut with materials. So that would take a little bit more conversation to see how we could do that, or how it could potentially be phased in a way that you're not going to compromise your learning objectives, but maybe FF&E comes at a later date. Maybe the furniture that you have now would be sufficient, or at least pieces of it that you could get by day one, but maybe on next year's budget, you look at adding in some additional FF&E. So without your input, that's sort of where we started. There are additions that we could do, but obviously not without your input.
Can I just ask a general
Please,
question?
please.
I'm just going to go back to the courtyard thing, just since I have you here. and
Sure.
My principal sitting here. Does it make sense, like, either to do that part of the study in the sense that it doesn't look as if you're touching outside or anything here? Does it make sense to do that, even if we wanted to? Could we do that separately? Would it make sense to do that separately or not? Or what's your general?
Because it's not tying directly in with the physical construction
Yeah.
of your media center, it can be done in conjunction or it can be done separately. The two aren't married to each other. So if you just want to understand what you could get from it,
Yes.
that's a study that we could easily do now.
Okay. All right.
And it could even help. I don't know what your funding is currently for the project, but we could help you identify what we believe the probable cost would be.
I think we've
And then
already
you
done
could
that.
tell us.
I
if
think
we're-
we've already done that with you.
Okay.
Jill?
Given how variable pricing is these days, could you talk a little bit about what these cost estimates are based on, what your process was, and
Sure.
how you what you built into account for the current variability?
So we actually do a line item budget, and that's what was included in the previous presentation. We do all our own estimating in-house, and we do that because we are bidding several projects really a month. And we see the real world values coming in. The questionable items that are variable are your windows and glazing. Those we're seeing jump 30% and they change daily. Steel, they won't quote us for more than an hour. So where you have structural movable partitions, those are the numbers that we're a little bit dicey on, because they could go up, they could go down. We're not seeing a lot of volatility with carpet or paint or really even furniture. We've seen the freight. That was the big hit with freight, is that a lot of furniture being made overseas or out of state have to get over here. They were getting locked up in port. Then you had to get the drivers. There was a driver shortage. So we saw freight go up. We're seeing that go down now as people are kind of getting back to normal. So we're based off of 2023 pricing where we see it. We also we throw in a little bit of what we call Southern Connecticut pricing. For whatever reason, contractors like to stick a little extra on you guys because they think you have some additional money. So we account for that. We are budgeting conservatively because what I would rather do is come to you with a number that I think is realistic and come in under budget than to come to one that we hope we can achieve and then we come in over budget. Presuming that we go out to bid and we see these numbers come in, depending on where they fall, we will negotiate with the contractor to see what can we compromise on that doesn't affect the goals and objectives of the school, but can still deliver a reasonable space.
Do you use a cost estimator during your bid process typically, or just?
No, we do it all in-house. For some projects, when it's requested, we will hire outside engineering estimating companies to do that. We don't do that because they're not usually as familiar with the drawings as we are. So they make a few assumptions, or they may not know something that we had intended. Now that gets fixed through a reconciliation process. When they come back with the numbers and we see what we budgeted, we'll go back and say, well, did you account for this? Did you account for that? How much did you estimate? So we can do that. If requested, we will do that.
Thank you.
And then I know one of the questions was, what is the benefit of potentially doing all three libraries at once? There would be a little bit of a hardship to you guys, is that all three of your libraries would be sort of out of commission at one time. But presuming that maybe you wanted to, in your bid forms, put out to the contractors, what would your price be to do these three schools individually? Would there be a benefit or a discount if we were to do all three schools at once? So you could see that because it's less oversight, good, strong teams, but then also the buying power. So if we're buying all the furniture, it's pretty much the same manufacturer. You're going off of a state contract. You're going to get higher tier discounting. You might see higher tier discounting for things like light fixtures going through lighting warehouses. So there are some financial benefits there, but it's the question of all three schools at the same time. Does it functionally make sense? And is the funding in place to be able to do that?
So that brings up a question for me with the, I guess, and we're we're way too early to Jill's point. This probably will have to go through a building committee and get more specific, but just a ballpark estimate on how long it would take to do. Is this something that can be done during the summer, or is this take the schools offline for X number of months?
Sure. I would say for your middle and elementary schools, if we say, let's take lead time issues off the table and say everything is readily available. To me, those two schools are small enough scope of work that they should, from a June to August, have no issue completing over a summer break. The high school is just larger and it's more complex. So that one, I would say you'd probably want to look at late spring, early spring, late winter, early spring start. And that could start as much as getting the contractor on board and getting the submittal process kind of done, so that maybe towards the mid-spring, we say libraries offline totally, and they can go in and do it in one fell swoop. You can phase it. It does take longer, it costs more, but it allows you to keep your library functional during the construction.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions?
I know it's in the memo, but do we want Joan to just touch for a minute on what this would enable from again, it's a long memo, but just from a high level instructionally.
Yes, I was going to ask the same thing. So I appreciate you inviting her up to do that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
you.
Dr. McGettigan, just touch on the high level of the educational benefits and curriculum teaching and learning.
If I had all the pictures and videos to show you of what's been going on at the high school, there have been usually all day, most days, not a seat to be had. So in the midst of this crowd, what can't really happen efficiently is instruction. So the two librarians regularly deliver instruction in inquiry projects, in capstone projects, in communication skills. Students have latched onto the podcasting room that we have set up. It's almost in constant use. We do have another podcast set up. When I wrote the grant last year, they equipped us with two. We just don't have the space for it. So we have, for example, some of the English teachers who would like to use it with their classes and have sort of a workshop going on, but we're limited because we just have the one podcast room. So the difficulty in trying to deliver instruction at all three schools is hampered by the crowds of other students in there. So it limits the scope of things that you can do. For example, one of the English teachers wants to stage a poetry workshop. Well, right now, because the reading room is not closed off, those students who need that quiet can't really get that quiet because you would have all this other stuff going on. And so we would literally probably have to shut the high school library down in order to have that event. So the librarians have been very clever in trying to move things around as much as possible. But at Middlesex right now, instructionally, she has a screen that's the size of this window shade. And it's smack dab in the center. So trying to deliver instruction when you have other groups over here who are looking for books and somebody else is doing this, and then they want to have contact with Denise for assistance. It's a difficult environment to make all these curricular things happen. So they've been limited in what they can do. Tokenique has been the one that has been operable, but the other two have been very difficult.
Katie?
Thank you. Just to confirm, we're not increasing any square footage in any of the libraries. We're just utilizing them better to be able to do more things at one time.
Correct. It's really operational efficiency. They have great bones. They really do. And we have fantastic librarians, wonderful teachers, great students, but we just don't have the space to sort of make all these different things happen that we want to happen. That high school library and the Middlesex library, you should theoretically have 3 or 4 different classes going on, but you really can't because of the limitations of furniture that's not flexible, space that's not flexible, lack of teaching equipment that would make that happen.
Other questions? Okay, thank you. Just a comment from me. I really appreciated the memo and I really enjoyed seeing tying into the vision of the graduate, which is our strategic document, into our work that we're trying to do. And to me, it's how we should work. And I like the process and I want to thank you all for accomplishing that.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Our next item on our agenda is an update on the 2016 KG&D Master Plan for Middlesex Middle School.
So I thought we would have the opportunity, and then the committee asked us to look at, just to give a quick update on the status of what has to be done at the middle school, the last 2016 K&G study, where we see that. And I think it fit in nicely to the discussion of the library. So with that, I have Rich and Kevin here who are happy to give you a wee update of what was done, and also to look ahead of what KG&D at that time said to maybe what we should do in terms of expanding, or might do in terms of expanding. And of course, that whole process is over right now. We'll need to do another study. In fact, there's legislation that would require some of that. So I'll ask my two gentlemen to speak to those issues.
So as you can see, the majority of what was flagged as like infrastructure needs has been completed or is about to be completed. The fire pump, which was one of the biggest ones we've talked about this year, it's hopefully set to be completed in the spring. We have a couple of items in the fiscal 25 projected capital budget, one in next year's capital project budget. The one thing that the KG&D study did talk about was the potential for a 7 classroom addition. That study is 7 years old. So you would really have to do another study to really decide whether or not you wanted to move forward with that. Given the pricing that was cited in that 2016 study, between that, the needs for new roofs, which are probably within the next 5 years. Once HHR is completed, the middle school would be the only school without central air conditioning. And so looking at that, it's probably going to be about a $30 million project, potentially more if escalation is high going forward for the next 5 years. I will say you certainly don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do another study currently, given the fact that we're looking at 3 elementary schools. Oxbridge is still going on. So ideally what you'd want to do is you'd look at that study timeframe maybe in the next 2 years. At that point, HHR would start winding down. Maybe you'd have that study completed on that last year when HHR is ready to open up. And then that following year, you'd have decisions to make about whether or not you'd want to address the middle school. Dr. Adley did mention it does look like it's going to be a requirement from the state that every 5 years you do a building condition survey study. If you recall, a couple of years ago, we proposed doing an update to this 2016 and we decided to defer it. That's probably not going to be an option to defer anymore. And that includes buildings that have been recently touched. So it's not an option to say, take Oxbridge and the HHR buildings offline, even though they've been relatively new. You are going to have to do a district-wide study that touches all 7 buildings. However, I would imagine the time needed for an architecture firm to look at those 4 buildings will be minimal because they'd be relatively new and just recently touched, but that is probably something that's going to come down the pipeline.
Questions?
Yeah. So what are you thinking the timeline is for a building condition survey? Is that contemporaneous with this or?
So I would think in the next 2 years, you're going to want to actually hire a firm to do that. Those tend to take about a year or so between collecting the information, putting the report together, bringing presentations to the Board of Education and making decisions. So if you did that in that time frame, within 2 years, HHR is going to start to wind down. And then as you have those conversations and presentations, then that's your opportunity to decide whether or not to move forward, whether it is an addition on Middlesex or it's not an addition. Maybe it's just, infrastructure improvements, whatever options are presented.
What was the time frame you said?
For-
Sorry,
You have to do
You're a couple of years out.
within a year?
5 years.
So you have to do it you're going to likely have to do one every 5 years. You certainly do not have the capacity to do a study for the middle school right now. There's between the 3 buildings in HHR, Oxford still going on. You don't have the staff to do it.
No, I understand, but you said that you would recommend.
I would recommend waiting 2 years and then that's when you'd start to do that study.
Okay, thank you too.
So we won't be voting on it a year from now. We'd be voting on it 2 years from now. Is that what you're saying?
And excuse me, when is the expiration date, if that's the right word, of the roof? When do we hit that point when we're needed to redo Middlesex roof?
So I think we had pushed out the roof, as Rich alluded to go in alignment with the HHR project winding down. So we are seeing some slight leaks here and there. So it is getting towards that 20-year mark where we're gonna have to start spending more time and operating expenses repairing it and maintaining it. But within the next, 5 years, it's gonna start to become a little bit more deteriorated.
Okay. And then I guess my question is in this proposal from KG&D from 6-7 years ago now, there was the addition of 7 classrooms.
Yes.
Is that, how does this work for us? Is that something that you propose, or is it something the survey comes through and says you need more room, or and how do we do that?
We would do something that like we did before with the last architectural firm that we had for preliminary, not only just to look at the design, but also classroom spaces, and the principal is sitting here this morning. That's getting a tighter and tighter space up there. So you're gonna need to do a study that includes an analysis of enrollment again, taking that into consideration. And the 7 classrooms, I think, at the time were, at the back of the building type thing that was designed such that you could do something at the back of the building. Whether that ends up like that or not, I don't know, but it would be done in consultation with enrollment.
So part of the scope of work that you would put out is to just look at space overall in the school. You would provide existing enrollment, you'd look at classroom counts, and you'd feed that information to the architect to say, we need a certain amount of classrooms, and then they would do the analysis, whether or not it ends up being 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, depending on how enrollment looks. And then they would also look at spaces, whether it's the cafeteria or the library or the auditorium.
Yeah, to me, this is just the part of the previous agenda item with the reworking of the library. Seems we should tie it in together with the entire program, as opposed to looking at doing this section and then building around it. So I think for me, I would like to work all of this together.
So that would be pretty similar to what you did with HHR.
Right.
We knew there was a need for the libraries at Hindley and Royal and Holmes. And so that's part of HHR, but it's also, putting additions on the schools. So it'd be very similar concept.
Okay.
So just coming back to timeline, if we were to defer having the study done for 2 years and then the time it takes the study and then potentially the time it takes, what are we really looking at in terms of how long before anything even starts to be addressed, and really how long before these are addressed?
So you're probably looking at around 4 years, depending on how quickly like a building committee gets up and running. So if you're waiting 2 years to do the study, you figure another year to do the study and, present the study. And then depending on how quickly the board and, the various town bodies decide on acting on whether or not they want to do any of those items. And then it's, a year to do, schematic design and planning and things like that. And then that following year, if all goes well, you break ground.
And Kevin, can the building really wait that long for some of the issues?
It'll be tight. We're gonna have to look at the timeline. You may want to bring the study forward, right? The last year of the HHR or otherwise. I think we're going to have to really look at the timeline, because with enrollment and what it is at the moment in terms of capacity to do the work, do we want to wait that long is the question, as long as we have the capacity to pull it off. So I think that's up for discussion as to when we would actually kick in the actual study to start with.
Well, you definitely don't have the capacity to move it forward. Well,
That's fair.
Well, that's an open discussion, right? I want the building done, right? But I don't want it done like if we can't pull it off, I can't pull it off. I'm going to be honest with that.
But I think we need to have as to Mrs. Loveland's point, I think is as soon as we can begin to have capacity, we need to start putting this on the agenda. Because I think the other part too is the air conditioning at Middlesex. This would be our only school without air conditioning.
Correct.
Or central air conditioning. And with the temperatures that are coming in even April and May, and it's I've been, and even in September, I've been on that 3rd floor for parents' night, and it's brutal in there. So, so anyway, okay. John, any questions on that? Are you good or? Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead, please.
Just one final question. And I just wanted to ask about the difference between a building condition survey and kind of a master plan, and where we were thinking in terms of really looking longer down the road so that we're not faced with multiple buildings that have need at the same time, and we are able to space things out. Where does that fit in?
So a building condition survey evaluates like the infrastructure within all your buildings, things like that. A master plan will look at things like, should you consolidate ELP, for example? So if there's bigger objectives for the board, similar to how when they decided that rather than having ELP in 3 separate buildings and wanting it at one, that's where you kind of roll that into a master plan.
And we don't have plans to do that right now.
No, unless you do.
Anything else, Joe?
So what are the next steps then?
There's the middle school or in general, I would think in within a couple of years, you would see a budget request for a building condition study of all 7 schools with a primary focus on the middle school. And then if that's approved, we'd go out to bid for an architectural firm to do that study. And then that study would come back to the facilities committee and then obviously the Board of Ed to give updates on how we would proceed going forward.
I think it's depending on how this committee wants to interact with the full board and the full board to get a sense of what's the timeline you're looking at and what's a rollout, and then because we would have to have a sense of approval for that of what year we're going to put in the study, because all of that kicks off from there, right? So I think the board would have to weigh in terms of, we kind of agree with that time frame, or can we expedite or push it off even, whatever. I want a consensus of. So there needs to be some sort of discourse about this meeting, about what was presented and what a possible timeline, and even openness to actually doing it, right? I'm thinking that there is, I think that there's definitely a need for the middle school, right? There's definitely prioritization of the libraries for the high school to start with. If there's a general sense from the board that that's a good direction, then that's okay.
So in your thinking then, are you thinking that the sort of chain of events would be library work contemporaneous with HHR, middle school after HHR, Tokenique after that? Is that what I just heard you say?
Yeah, that's a general sequence, yes. Well, that's a sequence, yes. But the board could say, no, I'd like to take the recommendation or consideration of doing them all together, and we can have that discussion. But I'd like to hear what the board would, what their thoughts are on that proposal.
I think it would be pretty important for us to understand the trade-offs either way. If you do it as a middle school or the way that we just outlined versus packaging the libraries together.
I'll just put this question out here since it was discussed today again several times. Would the committee be adverse to considering the outside landscape classroom to continue simultaneously, or would you want it to be not to be started until this whole process? Because that's a couple of years away. That's a couple of years away. Yeah.
I almost think it's a separate question, isn't it, than the libraries?
Yes, it is.
Zone it item.
Yes.
Yes. So
are you willing to consider it as a second question? That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
asking
Good.
here in the-
Yeah, that's what we'll do then. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our next agenda item, which is continued discussion on the Darien High School auditorium upgrade project.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting further discussion on this project. So you'll see in the memo that I worked with Jeff to prioritize the year 1 and year 2 investments, and then expanded upon the needs in each priority. So the first priority would be audio improvement, and the upgrades needed would be new microphones, new speakers, and a new audio control system. So the summary of the needs, right now, we are currently operating in the auditorium with only 2 handheld mics and 1 wireless mic. I can't speak to, why we don't have the equipment, but I can speak to the fact that we need proper equipment to amplify our musicians. and that we're often relying on rentals or, borrowing equipment from other departments to put on, pretty basic presentations. So this is a huge need to upgrade our microphone system. The space's current speakers, if you can picture when you walk into the auditorium, there are the two right in the center. So those are original to the building, and they were designed to deliver speech and presentation in the space, not music or theatrical productions. So we really need to replace these with line array speakers so that everyone in the auditorium can adequately hear amplification of sound, both speech and music. When we brought our consultant in to walk through the space with us, that's the first thing he noticed. And that's the first thing anyone with any knowledge of sound design notices. They say, wow, you have this huge space and you have two small speakers right in the center. How is that working? And our answer is just, it's not working well. It's not working well. And then our existing audio control system. So this is how we, turn on microphones and adjust sound. We need to replace that because currently we have a system that is complicated to operate. And what we really need is we need a digital control system so that anyone who needs to run a meeting in the auditorium can walk to the board and press a button and there's a microphone on. Press two buttons and there's two microphones on. And the same system will allow us to use that for our music technology classes, and so that students can train on audio design on a system that is usable, but also the type of system that they would see in any other venue. So this is would be a really important upgrade. In terms of the audio upgrades, I estimated that we have nearly 1,900 students who perform in the auditorium every year, and access to this high quality audio equipment will positively impact our curriculum because they'll be able to hear their own performance more accurately. Right now, what we're delivering in the auditorium is not accurate to the types of sound that we're producing in our classrooms. So it will also just allow for a better experience for everyone in the audience. And, perception is reality in terms of the sound. So if we're not able to amplify our sound appropriately and accurately for our student musicians, that's a big challenge for us when we're, presenting our curriculum to the public. So the second priority is video and streaming. So our current video cameras that we have in the auditorium are low resolution cameras that were designed originally for broadcast to standard definition public TV. The system, to say it doesn't provide current quality, it really doesn't provide acceptable quality to the point where they're really not usable for performances. And I have a video available to show you in just a minute. So we currently rely on DAF to stream our events. And to be fair, DAF is their systems are designed for sporting events. So they do an adequate job, but they don't do the type of job that we would expect for, sound quality and video quality for performance music. And they're also not always available. They're stretched thin during the spring sports seasons. So we're often relying on, parents to record on iPads and phones rather than having the ability to record and document our programs in the auditorium. And then the other part of this is we bought a Decatree, which is a type of microphone array that's used to improve recording quality of live performances. It's pretty much the industry standard for recording sound. So we have that in our possession. But what we really need to do in this project is mount it. Right now, when we use it, we have to put it on a pole in the center of the stage. It's very labor intensive. And while it produces beautiful sound, it's not viable to set that up for every production. So Michelle, if you wouldn't mind queuing up the presentation, this is something I was able to show Dr. Adley and the other administrators. So if you look at the first example, so this is, I'll tell you when, this would be last year. DAF was not available to record. And so this is our DHS Spring Orchestra concert being recorded and streamed from our current system. And if you press play, I'll see if it's queued up to what it needs to be. Can you put it to like 30.00. You can scoot it this fast. Perfect.
John, maybe?
So this is, I'll give you 10 seconds of. All right, Michelle, I think that does the trick. So, you know, without something to compare it to, you think, okay, it doesn't sound great, but you know, maybe that's kind of what we would expect. If you look at the next slide, Chris Andrade is our choral director and also our music technology teacher. And, you know, he decided, listen, I want to set up my own system for recording this year. I want to find out what would happen if I actually rigged a system of iPads that were high quality, cameras that were high quality, mounted the Deca-Tree at center stage, used a mixer, and he brought in his friends to record the concert because he said, I want to get a quality recording. And this is what he was able to do. And we can scoot this one. I think it's 37, Michelle. That's close enough. Should have sound, no?
That's ironic, isn't it?
Oh, no. There we
There we
go.
go.
And unfortunately, our speakers aren't gonna do it justice, right? I mean, hopefully you can tell just
I
from,
can tell.
You-
When you shoot it,
Yeah.
I could.
I mean, you can see the children and you can hear the acoustic sound. And so, you know, you can stop that, Michelle. Thank you. You know, unfortunately, we can't do that for every concert. You know, we can't spend days rigging artificial systems to get a quality recording. So it's vitally important that we have the ability to make these videos in our performances. You know, the students and teachers use them to analyze their performances. We track growth over time. Teachers should have the ability to submit these recordings for competitions. Students should be able to use them for auditions. And we just currently are not documenting our performing arts program the way that we should. You know, this is what we present to the world. This is the Darien Performing Arts Program. And if we don't have a way to capture that, that looks and sounds beautiful the way that it sounds live, you know, that's how we're demonstrating our program. So it's been challenging. And then in terms of streaming, if we had the type of equipment that we're requesting, you know, streaming has become just an ubiquitous form of content delivery. We're actually incorporating streaming units into our Music Tech 2 curriculum. And the students are really interested in how to produce and manage their own high quality creative content. So this is potentially a source of training for streaming operators for concerts and et cetera. So that would be a huge impact to our students for career preparation as well. And then I can be more brief on the other three priorities, but priority 3, we currently have a communication and intercom system. So if you think about our shows, the teachers and students need to be able to communicate catwalk to stage to control when they're running a show. And you know, this is according to our theater folks and Jeff. We have a current intercom system that is original to the building, 8 wired communication stations, only of which 4 are operational. So the upgrade that we're proposing will upgrade to wireless technology and will allow our student operators to communicate with directors and just improve the technical quality of the shows. And then priority 4, our video wall. If you think of the way our current auditorium is, we have a projection screen kind of at center stage. It's about 2/3 of the way back. That is currently a manual drop and lift. So someone has to physically walk to the catwalk and like pull it up and down, which becomes very labor intensive. And so it means that we're not utilizing projection the way that we could and the way that we should. It also means that if we have a show set up on stage, which we often do, we have to tear down the whole thing in front of it to actually use projection for any kind of presentation. We're also requesting that we replace the existing projector because the one that we have currently is an older square aspect ratio. And most of the content we project is imagine the projection right now being a tiny box. That's kind of what we're dealing with our current projector and screen. And then the biggest item here is really the LED video wall. So we are proposing that we move the projection screen in front of the red curtain, so that if you think about, we could close the red curtain and then the projection screen would be an automatic raise lower, so that we're doing a presentation such as what we did last night, 8th to 9th grade transition. You've got everybody sitting down in the pit. You really don't need the stage at all. You can keep the curtain closed and we can have the stage set up for any kind of performance. Mark Brackett comes and, we come in the middle of December. We did quite a lot of legwork to tear down our stage and reset our stage several hours so that we could have that presenter there. If we were able to move the projection screen in front of the red curtain, we could then really utilize more of our stage without the legwork from our teachers. And then in terms of the LED video wall, we would propose adding that to the current, where the current projection system is. We don't currently utilize projection in our music and theater productions because the images are disturbed by the setup on stage. So what a video wall does is it's its own source of light. So the images are projected from behind rather than relying on a projector. So presenters and performers on stage can be positioned anywhere on stage without disrupting the images. Video walls are really becoming the industry standard for conference rooms, theaters, arenas. In the musical theater world, if you go to any show, many of the sets are digital sets now. And those are actually available for students can design sets. We can purchase digital sets. And the amount of money, time, and space it takes to create these huge wooden painted sets with individual backdrops. This would really improve our theater curriculum by allowing us to utilize these virtual sets.
Colleen, I learned a lot. I think I did, even from the last discussions we had. If I go to an outdoor event, like, I don't know, a PGA event in Hartford or something, right? And they have the projections of.
Yeah.
Is that essentially what we're seeing? That's their size, but we can have any size you want and make it any size. Is that true?
Absolutely, yes. We wouldn't need the outdoor type of video wall. We would need the indoor one. But yeah, essentially, anywhere you go, typically, you're going to see an LED video wall.
Sure.
And then on the next slide, Michelle, there's just a different, or maybe the next, if you scroll down, you can see how this is used in the theater. So this would have a huge impact on our theater curriculum, again, because we could utilize virtual sets. This technology would also allow our students in music and theater tech, art, film, web design, any other STEM classes to collaborate with creative, innovative digital content. So our students would be able to learn how to design, operate, and manage LED video walls for live events such as concerts, theater productions, and conferences, just like Dr. Adley was alluding to. Anywhere you go that there is, we really have this technology for any kind of presentation you would see in the real world. So this would be invaluable for students applying to colleges in various fields, not just music and theater, but media, design, business and marketing, engineering.
Does this mean we can do Les Mis a wee bit earlier?
You know what? Couldn't hurt. That's for sure. Dr. Adley, I'll put any show up that you ask for. And then the last thing, of course, there we go, the confidence monitor. So essentially you're using a confidence monitor right now. And so in our auditorium, students don't always have good visibility of the conductor during performances. It's typical during performances in other venues, and I've experienced them many times as a choir and theater director, to use this type of monitor during a musical theater performance in a large theater like ours. So, imagine a student is staged to be, in Les Mis, perishing on the side of the stage, and they need to come in on a note. they're perishing on stage, yet they need to turn their head to look at the conductor to start their song. That's kind of what we're talking about. And the challenge with our space is that if you think about, we have one entrance in the back. Typically, the confidence monitor would be back there. Most stages have two entrances. In our theater, we can't even hook up a temporary one there because that's the entrance to the theater. So we're talking about mounting the monitor on the balcony ceiling. And this would be used for not just our theater productions, but also it could be used by any speaker or presenter in the auditorium. So, Dr. Adley is at convocation with the LED video wall in the back and
Don't say that. I need that confidence monitor.
and the confidence monitor up front. And we're able to, I think it would make the space not only valuable for our performers from a curriculum standpoint, but just as a large, that we have this beautiful space, these technological upgrades such as this would just take us to the next level in terms of the ability to hold events and in a polished, modern, beautiful way. So those are the 5 priorities, and I'm happy to talk through questions.
Questions?
No, sure.
A couple.
Yes.
So one of the things you mentioned is the standard.
Yes.
And I would imagine that I like for us to be at the front end of standards, but
Yes.
what is the standard for high schools versus the standard for theaters? Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'll go ahead and ask my second question because
Sure.
I think it's embedded. I think there's some things that have changed, right? I'm sure that I am baselining against what I understand to be forward thinking, which is pretty far back. So, when we talk about preparing students, what they are experiencing, what are the expectations? Can you give me a little more flavor around, why these things are standards today and what students are expected to understand as they go out into a variety of the careers that you mentioned, for example, or other environments?
Yes. So we have a very, I would say one of the biggest impacts on curriculum in terms of how we're training students is through music and theater technology. So, when we're running our theater classes, it's not only important for students to understand how to perform, but it's important that they understand how to perform using sound equipment and to be able to design using appropriate lighting. So, if you think about a production, for every performer on stage, there are 10 to 20 who are, backstage. This is really where the jobs are. And it also, we're really working in a collaborative 21st century environment through our engineering, our art program, our music program, so that, we should be collaborating and we could be collaborating more with our film department, with our web design department, and really develop a program so that our theater is not just used for presentations, and it's not just used by who we're hiring to run the lights and sound, but we can develop a program with these upgrades that allow our students to really take ownership of the auditorium as a teaching and learning space. We are not utilizing the auditorium as a teaching and learning space currently. We really aren't. And so, even when we had we did a big walkthrough in order to come to this consensus. So I worked with Jeff, Nestor was there, Mark Mazzoni, Tim Sorensen, Theater 308, Chris Andrade, music tech and choral music, John Grauer, instrumental music. And we worked with a consultant who is a theater educator. And, we really talked about how these improvements would allow us to just make the theater basically a working theater, a training theater. And then some of the materials that we currently have could even be repurposed to go to the little theater so that students are training on, quite frankly, outdated technology, because there may be venues that they go to that are still using analog or wired systems. But that's not what they will typically see in most high schools. And this really is, we're not necessarily talking about, we're talking about some innovation, but these are the things that we would expect to have for students to interact with in their theater curriculum, but also in their technology curriculum, their media curriculum. We have we have robust STEM courses, and students really could be utilizing this technology in a broad way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The questions?
Eddie?
Hi, John.
Hey, thanks. Good morning again, and thank you. I guess what I'm really struggling with is, the need to haves, and I view the audio improvement, microphones, speakers, controls, and the communications and intercom as, necessities to run productions, run any sort of presentations in the auditorium. But then I look at, and again, what I saw, the video streaming and recording and the video system, that's perfect and awesome and a great step up in technology, as well as a video wall and a projection screen and that $370,000 estimated investment. Also great technology, but I'm trying to draw the line of what's really cool and what we should be supplying as a necessity to our students in our community. I keep drawing the line or the parallel, what we did in the sports side of things. And there's tremendous amount of money raised privately for a lot of nice to haves. And some of the things we could debate whether or not the nice to haves or need to haves, like turf fields or lights. I go back to the video board at the stadium, again, another donation. And I don't want to rely on, past decisions, how we decided to how this community decided to fund it. But I also don't want to stray from some of the standards that we set previously. I fully, endorse the idea to move forward with the audio improvement, the microphones, speakers, and controls. But I really like to have a better understanding, with a board discussion, the standards we want to set among some of the other things. I go back, the cameras. Well, yes, DAF does film sports, but not every sports game. Parents film for a huddle in football. They take their own cameras and use it. So, again, it'd be great to have unlimited funds and apply, some of these applications and provide the community with most awesome technology for productions and presentations. But I'm not sure that it meets the standards that we set previously using taxpayer dollars for this. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, John, was that a question to be answered or just?
No, wasn't a question. It
Oh,
was
okay,
just,
okay.
I guess it's a charge for our committee to bring to the board and have that discussion in making the decision of how to fund this request and whether or not we draw certain lines of standards in terms of what we should fund, from taxpayer dollars and what are nice to haves that we should help raise money for in the private side of things. And I realize we're talking about different communities and different sizes of communities in terms of raising money, but I want to be in tune to that as we have moved this discussion forward to the board.
Only because Colleen's got the mic ready. Do you have a quick resonate on that or not?
I would say the biggest thing as you have the discussion, the biggest thing I would ask you to consider is, impact on curriculum. So, every one of the items listed, we're not just talking about, recording extracurricular, or, the theater programs that run in the summer, but, every one of the items does tie into our music and theater curriculum, but also our technology curriculum. So, our film students, or even our sports marketing students, our business students, can be utilizing this technology by learning how to give presentations in our auditorium using the cameras, the controls, the boards. So that would be the distinction that I would make in the conversation.
Only because Colleen's got the mic ready. Do you have a quick resonate on that or not?
I would say the biggest thing as you have the discussion, the biggest thing I would ask you to consider is, impact on curriculum. So, every one of the items listed, we're not just talking about,
And along those lines, then if we could have some numbers provided to us, how many, students participate in these activities, that would be very helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I can collaborate with the other departments and see, the enrollment there and how they might utilize the technology. That's a great idea.
Katie?
Thank you. To Mr. Sini's point, I was going to make the same point that you did, Ms. Thompson, is that, well, I'm a huge supporter of sports. I was an athlete, now I'm a coach. The difference I see is curricular versus extracurricular. This is actually part of our curriculum. And I also just wanted to say that I very much appreciate this presentation. The first time that you brought it, I saw the need, but being able to see the examples of what we have and what we could have, and to just better understand, not being someone well-versed in this space, it was really, really great to be able to understand what is a video wall and how often do we maybe see them in our lives currently. And I think that I very much appreciate your connection to just kind of the modern world and all the jobs that this would touch, and how far beyond it goes. Just our stage performers, I can see so many connections to just general professional life from company and organizational tie-ins with this. So I appreciate the way that you laid this out. Thank you.
Jill?
I have two more tactical questions.
Sure.
One, I'd like to understand, the first one is what your dollars are based on.
Sure. So in the original proposal, Jeff was able to work with several vendors, and the challenge is we had to make the proposal and the presentation first before we hire a consultant to really do the hard numbers. But the estimate, he says that the estimates are made based on a number of factors, including quotes from local companies, projections of market rates for similar services, and input from independent industry experts who have provided consultation on a volunteer basis. So that's where we are, and that's kind of the best that we could do in terms of the estimates for the individual segments in the project, and then the project as a whole.
Okay. So I appreciate that. I'll turn to you guys. What have we built? That there's some variability in there. How have we built the number beyond that to account for the fact that we just, again, it's such a pricing is so variable depending on whether something's, I'll stop talking, but whether something's being impacted by shipping or, I know this is not steel, but what have you. How did you build it beyond that?
So ideally, if this were to go forward, we would know by early spring. So the price variability wouldn't be as significant. We'd be putting this out to bid in the spring. We'd be getting those quotes, which shouldn't be that far off from the quotes that were received in the October, November timeframe. If it delays, then obviously we'd probably have to look at some type of contingency. If we weren't going to do it this summer and maybe we're going to do it the following summer, we would likely have to build in some type of escalation cost.
Okay, but you don't have escalation or contingency built in now?
No.
And following up on that, so my question is, what is the timeline that we have to do? If we want to start this July 1st, what is our timeline that we then have to retrofit to that time?
We would need to put a bid out probably in April.
Okay.
Staying on this subject of schedule, of course, we know that this auditorium is used year round.
Yes.
So I'm certain that you've thought of that.
Yes.
But having watched the summer school enrollment for the theater program, disappear in one day, which is exciting. Can you talk about how you're thinking about going about this?
Sure. And just in terms of the timeline, I would say in terms of, appointing a project designer or having someone help us start to get the process going, I would say the sooner the better, because you're right that the theater is used pretty widely. The best timeline I would say would be to get things started in June after our last curricular show. Maybe get the project started in a way that would still allow a production for our summer school students in July, and then continue work on the project. That being said, I mean, the work is so important that if we had to, if, for example, some sort of system were offline and we had to borrow or retrofit a system to get a production going over the summer, we would do that. But the idea is that we would, if all goes well, that we would have a plan to allow for our existing programs to move forward without much interruption.
And if summer school has to figure out how to get equipment, there's money in that budget for them to figure that out.
I would just add too, that when it comes time to go out to bid, you could also put in the bid documents that the work would need to happen around summer school, whether that's a night or a weekend or what have you. But we do have flexibility in that building to get the work done. Hopefully little interruption of the programming.
I have a follow- oh, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
Dr. Adley, do any of the phys ed classes use any other field but the stadium field?
What was the question? Do any other classes?
Do any of the phys ed classes use?
Some of them will go out and find spaces to do science experiments and different things like that. Physical, as obviously phys ed comes, there's obviously a class that uses it. I think that's.
You were asking about the filming, John?
No, I'm sorry. Let me restate the question. Let me know if do any of the physical education classes use any other field but the stadium field?
Oh,
Predominantly the stadium field is what they use. And they go around the track and or go around the cross country area.
That's correct. And they use Stadium East pretty frequently.
But I don't generally see them in the other areas generally.
So they use the stadium East, and they track. Okay. And then secondly, another follow-up. Are any other classes like public speaking or elements of education like public speaking or physical education taped with our own devices, like video recording devices?
I would say that, and this is just talking extemporaneously here, because I would have to check. That's a bigger scope, because people do those things individually on their own all the time. I would need to get the scope of that. I would imagine, John, that they would be doing a number of those things on their own.
Okay, thank you.
Joe.
actually, as you were talking about the streaming, this is sort of embedded in the first question I asked, but I had a similar question to I think what John is asking is that, I understand how it's used in extracurricular sports, but I don't understand why you would need to film a chorus concert. My baseline is going to watch it and everybody holds up their iPhone. And why do we need to do that for older students? What's the purpose?
Sure. So the students use their recordings for evaluations. Essentially, for example, our midterm at the high school, they're watching and listening to their concert recordings, and they're using it to evaluate and analyze their performance. Then we also use recordings from other ensembles, from other schools or other professional ensembles. So it's a big part of, watching and listening to a performance, it's a huge part of the music curriculum. It helps the students identify their growth over time. It helps them identify even acoustically, what is the difference between performing in a small classroom and performing on stage. And then our technology students then listen and analyze their design of the microphone setup, or their design of, the video students can look at the design of their camera setup and what shots they were able to get based on, a variety of things. So those are the kind of nuts and bolts curriculum things, just in terms of having a permanent record of a performance. So essentially it's our final exam for the end of the year, right? And so it's also the way that we present our program to our constituents, present our program. For example, I fill out a survey every year to be recognized by the NAM Foundation as a best community for music education. And, our concert recordings are part of that process. So we show what type of repertoire and performances we're able to produce through our curricular training by showing those videos. I would say also in terms of students applying, for example, we have our jazz students are going to Philadelphia to participate in a festival, and we need to provide video of the students performing live in order to get them accepted to those types of things. And it's been difficult for us to do that with the current system.
Just a very small question. Tactically, are the jazz students, for example, that you're talking about, is that extracurricular or curricular?
It's actually co-curricular. So I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but we have our band, chorus, and orchestra program during the school day. And then our teachers have stipends to continue working with the students who are currently enrolled in band who have a specialty interest in jazz. It's difficult to distinguish, only that some of them do, for example, tutor singers, they meet during the school day, but part of their experience is a Wednesday evening rehearsal, and evening concerts are considered part of the school day curriculum because they're an extension of that.
One more.
Sure.
Then you talked about applying for colleges, and I don't know if you use the word portfolio, but that's what I was thinking of. Can you expand on that? I understand that, and that, looking at the student art around us, I understand that in the printed or illustrated or visual arts, but what does it look like for our students who are coming out of our programs? What does it mean to create a portfolio these days?
Sure. So if you're auditioning for musical theater, for example, I know we have several students right now who are, seniors, and they're looking to go on to music theater school. They need to present a portfolio of themselves doing live performances. And most of those happen during their school day theater program or during their performances in the evening. So they're using clips from those live performances to weave together a portfolio to audition. And actually what a lot of schools are doing now for music and theater students is you actually have to submit the portfolio first before you're offered a live audition. So for example, in the fall, they have to put together a portfolio of them performing in multiple places, both lessons, but also live performances, because they need to make sure that they're able to perform in those environments. So they would submit the portfolio, and then they get invited to audition live at their schools based on the video portfolio.
Okay. Is that true only for students who might be applying to more specialized programs, or do we have students going to more generalized programs who also include portfolios as part of their applications?
It would be hard for me to guess that. I mean, I would say in general, most of our students who I would say most of the programs that offer theater and music majors are more of those top tier performing programs. We're talking like NYU and Berkeley and places like that. And those are schools that our students are going to. And in general, they would have that portfolio for their top tier schools, but they would also be auditioning at other places and other state schools as well. But it's been, there are even requirements for summer programs sometimes, submit a portfolio to get admitted to this summer camp at NYU or something like that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can I also think it just at one level, like that, I don't need many more reasons to actually support it, but it also contributes to our digital communications in different capacities. But
What do you mean?
well, from last night, for instance, we have parents who prefer to observe the 8th grade night from home, either for convenience or necessity or anything. And we've done a good job doing that. When you improve the quality of those things, that's improving the quality of the communication about the programs back to the parents, or even when kids are on stage, even improving the quality of that is indirectly sort of support communication back to the community. at a higher level of quality. It's actually representing the community, the kids better actually. But anyway, just.
Well, and I'm glad you said that
I think
because I actually
think it
didn't.
falls on.
I didn't address the streaming portion of your question. I was only addressing the recording portion, but I mean, they are very similar in that, you know, for example, you could essentially say to, you know, our kids are getting recruited for, music and theater. You know, I've got a performance tonight at 7:00 that's being streamed. Here's the link. You know, that is a possibility as well. So, that would be the case for both streaming and recording, and the potential upgrades would handle both.
So Dennis, if I may jump in, where I was going with this was equity, and thanks for bringing up the recruiting. And, you know, clearly there's not my sons, they're not playing at Clemson, but there are people that are recruited for sports and such, but they have to use their own resources and private resources. So I'm just calling out a issue of equity that I think the board needs to explore. Thank you.
So I just have a couple of one going back to the previous point or previous agenda item. Again, I thank you for including the impact on curriculum in the memo. I think it's very helpful. But just personally for me, I think the hard part for me is just seeing this $1.2 million budget item, and I realize you're new and it's, you know, we had COVID and everything else in there, but I guess this is kind of a two-part question. So one is, what is the lifespan of this kind of work we're putting in, and do we then expect, you know, so kind of thinking, you know, hopefully I won't be on the board in 10 or 15 years, but if the lifespan is that, will there be another $1.2 million budget, or is this something we can space out over time and have more reasonable upgrades over, you know, every 2-3 years we see a $100,000, $200,000
Sure.
implement?
You know, again, thank you for pointing that out. I can only speak to, you know, the amount of time that I've been employed in the district and how I was able to identify the needs. I do see this as a huge priority for my position, whether it's me or someone else. And I'm hoping to set the precedent for continual program evaluation, inventory, and equipment evaluation, so that, you know, when we're getting the bids for this equipment, and when we're training our current people to use it, we are keeping track. We're making sure that we purchase items that are going to be that are going to last a long time, and that we can make reasonable upgrades to them without completely dismantling the whole system and starting over. So I guess the best way I can answer that is that, you know, I'm going to establish a yearly really evaluation of our equipment and our programming, and we'll be able to include reasonable upgrades and needs through the typical budget process, you know, without coming back. You know, I don't intend to, you know, do this upgrade and 15 years from now we do a whole new upgrade. You know, that's not the plan.
Perfect. And then I guess the follow up to this is that, so, and kind of to Mr. Sini's points about, you know, prioritizing and what is necessary to have and what is nice to have. From my view, a lot of this is like necessary to have, I think. And then are there other upgrades that could potentially come in the future that would be extra or even more of a nice to have than a need to have? Or does this just get us to the bare minimum of today's technology? And then and again, I'm not asking, this is not a dollars and cents, it's more of a programmatic question, but are there other upgrades that we could have that you're not even venturing to go after at this point?
It's hard to say. You know, I would say this ask and this whole presentation and the whole memo, we were able to touch on everything that the consultant suggested in his visit. So, you know, and it wasn't just that the consultant suggested it, it's that we then looked at his suggestions and developed this program based on our needs. So, you know, we don't really have a huge list of, you know, this is just getting us started, and then we've got more things coming. But this really will take us to where we need to be. for quite some time. So it is pretty inclusive
Okay.
of our needs.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay,
So just to be clear of how we would proceed with this, will we continue to discuss at the board meeting? I can certainly follow up with the board chair in terms of the agenda, whether there's a separate agenda. I don't think it's going to be a separate agenda for it. But are we going to continue with the discussion or will we just play that out?
well,
Does this committee want me to bring anything special back to the board or otherwise?
question, you have a point?
Go ahead, but
For me, I think, yes, I think we have, at least from this meeting and last meeting, I think we are in favor of moving this along,
Okay,
just
okay,
not
okay.
in the process of the budget. So
Okay,
to me,
okay,
that
okay.
if April is our time, how do we then proceed to hit those marks? So to hopefully do this work in the summer of 23.
so I think that's right. There's a question there is if we take budget track or off budget track, can we map out those timelines, please? So we can see what they look like and have that ready for the board.
Or it might even be hybrid, guys, where, the board approves, one item, one priority in the budget and then pushes the rest to off budget. So, I mean, that's going to be part of the budget discussion at the next meeting, I would gather, right?
Yes. Agreed.
So to get the timelines, Alan, to Jill's point, would be very helpful if we take it out off budget versus through budget, or are there certain elements of this that we can go, hybrid, if you will.
Appreciate it.
So is the question, John, is there anything we can pull out without impacting the rest of the work? Is that your question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm just going through my preferences, right? Simply as an example, but, audio improvement, microphone, speakers and controls, I'm going to be in favor for including that as part of the budget. So I think it accelerates it. That will be an answer. I mean, we, won't need a special approval, I guess. It's going to just go through the approval of the budget process. But if we can pull out, the other elements and take that outside of budget, does that impact the timeline at all?
Thank you. Perfect. Okay,
Do you
thank
want a
you.
recommendation from the committee beyond that, just to continue the conversation?
I don't know if you're talking to the chair or me.
Yeah.
For me, I think I'm fine with that.
Okay, that
Right.
we're in favor of the project, but looking at the most appropriate timing and funding.
Agreed.
Okay.
Uh,
Correct, John?
I guess we're in favor of continuing the discussion of the project.
Right.
I don't, unless you want to take a consensus vote right now about the
I don't
project.
think we have to. I think we're okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And our last item is public comment.
I got to run, guys. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John.
When anyone on Zoom would like to participate, please use the raised hand icon. There are no raised hands.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everybody, very much.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn. So Joe moves. All in favor?